Hello to you and welcome to this deep dive. Usually when we talk about a global crisis, especially an energy crisis, there's this expectation that it works like a light switch.
Oh, absolutely. People tend to view the global market in absolute binaries, like open or closed,
Right.
broken or functioning.
But when you look at the actual mechanics of the global energy system, well, that light switch metaphor completely falls apart.
It really
The
does.
system doesn't just flip off, it bends, it hides its stress, and then it violently resets. So today, we are taking you behind closed doors to decode a massive global risk.
Yeah, we are looking at what actually happens when a major energy choke point gets disrupted, specifically the Strait of Hormuz.
And to do that, we've got a fascinating set of sources grounding this discussion. We're examining a corporate profile and a highly detailed strategic memo from a Washington, D.C. advisory firm called Connector Inc.
Right, and the memo was written by their vice president, Rick Westerdale.
I really appreciate this source material because it gives us this completely unvarnished insider perspective. Let's set the scene for you. Connector Inc. is located right at 513 Capitol Court NE in Washington, D.C.
A very strategic location.
Exactly. And if you look at their corporate website, it's full of that sterile, polished PR language, right? They talk about deploying, quote, state-of-the-art stakeholder strategies.
Which just sounds great on paper.
It does. But let's be real about what that actually looks like on a Tuesday afternoon during a geopolitical crisis.
Oh, it's chaos.
Right. You have Rick Westerdale, who has, 30 years of experience in the global energy industry and government, and he is sitting in his Suite 300 office fielding frantic calls from corporate executives.
Executives who are essentially hyperventilating.
Totally. Because their multi-billion-dollar supply chains are suddenly anchored in a combat zone.
And Rick's job in that moment isn't just to talk them off a ledge. As a high-level advisor, he actually has to retrain how these executives understand the physical reality of the market.
Because when a client calls in a panic about the Strait of Hormuz being blocked, their immediate assumption is that the supply is just gone.
Right. But Rick's core thesis in this memo is that energy networks operate on what he calls a hidden clock.
A hidden clock.
Yeah, a hidden clock of flow, timing, and confidence.
And to understand that hidden clock, we really need to look at the sheer scale of the Strait of Hormuz. We are talking about a waterway that handles roughly 1/5 of the entire global oil supply.
Which is massive.
It's more than 20 million barrels every single day, along with close to a quarter of all global liquefied natural gas, or LNG, trade.
Yeah, and when a disruption hits a choke point of that magnitude, you would naturally assume the market sees up within hours.
But they don't seize up, at least not instantly.
No, they don't. And that delay is arguably the most dangerous phase of a disruption because it creates a false sense of security.
It will you in.
Exactly. The market absorbs the initial shock. You have to remember that the physical supply hasn't vanished. All the cargoes that have already been loaded at the ports in the Middle East, well, they still exist.
Right.
What actually happens is that the massive tankers carrying that supply simply slow down. Or they drop anchor in safe waters.
Okay, let's unpack this because I was trying to visualize the sheer physics of this. And it essentially resembles a massive highway traffic jam.
That's a great way to look at it.
Think about a major interstate. An accident happens miles ahead. For the cars stuck in the jam, they are all still technically on the road.
Right.
So from a satellite view, it looks like a perfectly intact highway full of vehicles. But nothing is actually moving toward its destination. The system is just forcing everyone to idle.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. A supertanker holds around 2 million barrels of oil. When the captain drops anchor to wait out a crisis, that vessel transforms from a transport vehicle into a massive floating steel warehouse.
Wow. Floating steel warehouses.
Yeah, and for a brief period, this creates the illusion that the global system is holding together. Sure, the news headlines are intense and traders are getting nervous, but the physical structure appears intact.
Which means Rick Westerdale is sitting in his D.C. office telling his panicked clients not to trust what they are seeing. That initial calm isn't stability. It's purely a delay.
Exactly. And a delay means a timer has started. As days turn into weeks, the buffers that sustain that illusion begin to erode.
Because you can't idle forever.
Right. If a tanker is tied up acting as floating storage in the Arabian Sea, it isn't returning to the port to pick up tomorrow's shipment.
So the friction starts cascading backward through the supply chain.
Precisely. First, the global freight market tightens up because the physical availability of ships just plummets.
Makes sense.
Then, the maritime insurance markets react, and this is huge. Ships operate on razor-thin margins but carry massive liabilities.
Oh, I bet.
If underwriters in London designate an area as a severe risk zone, they don't just gently raise premiums, they multiply them overnight.
Wait, really? Overnight?
Oh, yeah. A single voyage might suddenly cost an extra $500,000 in war risk insurance. Or the underwriters might just flat out refuse to cover the hull at all.
Wow.
And if the hull isn't insured, the ship owner will simply not allow the captain to sail.
But wait, don't governments have massive strategic petroleum reserves for exactly this reason?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if a choke point closes and ships can't get through, why wouldn't Washington or Beijing just tap into their reserves to bridge the gap and solve the problem?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a natural assumption, but it ignores the physical reality of logistics.
Okay.
Governments absolutely do step in and release strategic reserves to try and calm the markets. But those reserves are designed purely to buy time. They cannot restore the physical movement of the broader system.
I see.
You can pump millions of barrels of oil out of salt cavern in Louisiana, but that doesn't help a refinery in Japan that relies on constant scheduled deliveries to its specific port. The physical ships still have to transit the geography.
So having a massive stockpile of oil locally doesn't fix a broken delivery network globally.
Exactly.
And the stress isn't just felt by the ships, right?
Yeah.
Rick points out that the real breaking point happens in the heavy infrastructure, specifically the refineries.
Yes. This is where the chemistry and engineering of energy become massive liabilities.
How so?
Well, refineries, particularly across Asia, are not just giant vats that boil any crude oil you throw into them.
Right.
They are highly specialized chemical plants.
Right.
They're calibrated to process specific crude slates. And a crude slate is essentially the chemical profile of the oil. You know, its density, its sulfur content, things like that.
Okay.
Many Asian refineries are specifically tuned for Middle Eastern crude, which tends to be heavier and sour, meaning it has a higher sulfur content.
So it's not like swapping a generic battery into a toy. It's
Yeah.
more like trying to run a heavy diesel engine on unleaded gasoline because that's all you have.
Yeah, that's spot on. If a refinery suddenly has to replace Middle Eastern crude with light, sweet crude from West Texas or the North Sea, the machinery simply cannot process it efficiently.
Oh, man.
The refinery gets the wrong mix of refined products. Or worse, the mismatched oil physically damages their catalytic cracking units.
So they're literally breaking their own equipment.
Potentially, yeah. Within about a month of a disruption, these facilities face terrible choices. They either run suboptimal oil and damage their efficiency, or they're forced to throttle down their output entirely.
And when you layer all these mechanisms together, I mean, the floating storage filling up, the strategic reserves running out of utility, the insurance markets freezing, and the refineries choking on the wrong crude, the entire system reaches a breaking point.
It does.
Rick makes a really profound observation in the memo here. He states that at this specific point, the global energy system doesn't just bend. It undergoes a total reset.
And that reset marks the most terrifying mathematical shift for the global market. It is the exact moment when prices stop reflecting the overall availability of supply and they start reflecting the ability to deliver it.
So the price is no longer dictated by how much oil exists in the ground or in a storage tank somewhere.
No, not at all.
The price is entirely dictated by whether someone can physically navigate a ship to your port.
Exactly. And when that shift happens, the disruption ceases to be just a temporary logistical headache. It becomes a structural reality. The fundamental rules of energy pricing change entirely.
So let's follow that hidden clock a bit further. Eventually, geopolitics cool down, right? Diplomats step in, the military secures the shipping lanes, and the Strait of Hormuz technically reopens.
Right. The ships start moving.
The clients are probably calling Rick back, ready to declare victory. But Rick tells them to brace themselves. Why isn't a reopened waterway a reason to celebrate?
Because reopening a strait is just a mechanical act.
What do you mean?
Well, you can push a few tankers through a choke point under heavy naval escort, but that doesn't restore commercial confidence. For the vast majority of the market, the risk is still way too high.
Oh, I see.
And more importantly, the physical act of reopening triggers what Rick calls the logistical unwind.
The logistical unwind. To explain the physics of this, I love this analogy. Think about unkinking a high-pressure garden hose.
Yes.
If you have had a hose folded over for an hour, The water pressure has been building intensely behind that kink. When you finally release it, you do not get a nice, smooth, manageable stream of water.
Not at all.
You get a chaotic, explosive, uncontrollable blast that whips the hose in every direction.
That is the perfect visualization of the logistical unwind.
Mhm.
It is widely misunderstood because people assume reopening means a return to normal flow.
Right, they think, oh, the kink is gone, water flows normally.
Exactly. But in reality, as the flows accelerate through the reopened choke point, the system becomes exponentially more chaotic.
What does that chaos actually look like at the destination ports?
Well, think about all those delayed cargoes. The tankers that were anchoring as floating storage suddenly re-enter circulation simultaneously.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Destination ports in places like Singapore or Tokyo operate on incredibly strict appointment slots, much like air traffic control.
So they can't just take everyone at once.
Right. Suddenly, they are hit with 3 weeks' worth of supertankers arriving at the exact same time. The supply arrives completely out of sequence.
This is just a massive bottleneck.
A huge one. You end up with severe oversupply in one specific region, while a neighboring region is still starved for fuel. The refiners are completely overwhelmed trying to align the timing of these erratic arrivals with their own production schedules.
The system is moving again, but it is entirely unbalanced and flailing, which leads to a highly practical takeaway for anyone managing supply chain risk.
Absolutely.
Do not mistake the sight of the first ship moving through a strait for a return to normalcy.
Normalizing a market demands far more than a clear geographic path. It requires the refineries to stabilize their operations. It requires trust to return to the buyers.
And the insurance, right?
Yes, most importantly, it requires the insurance underwriters in London to possess enough confidence to lower their war risk premiums back to a sustainable level.
And that takes time.
That normalization process takes months, long after the news cameras have left the strait.
So to see the fragility of this entire process in its rawest form, we don't actually look at oil. We have to look at natural gas.
Yeah, this is a crucial point.
Throughout the memo, Rick points out that liquefied natural gas, or LNG, feels the disruption first and recovers last.
LNG is the ultimate test case for supply chain constraints. Unlike crude oil, you cannot simply drop anchor and store massive amounts of LNG indefinitely.
Because of the temperature requirements.
Exactly. To transport natural gas on a ship, you have to cool it to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit so it condenses into a liquid. It requires massive cryogenic thermos ships.
And maintaining negative 260 degrees requires a constant bleed of energy.
Yes. The ships use a tiny fraction of their own cargo, known as boil-off gas, to fuel their engines and maintain that extreme refrigeration.
Wow.
But there is a strict physical limit to how long they can sit idle. Furthermore, the infrastructure is completely rigid. You cannot just divert an LNG carrier to any random port that happens to be open.
Because they need specialized equipment to unload it, right?
Right. The receiving port must have a highly specialized regasification terminal built specifically to receive, warm, and distribute that gas.
And the global LNG market relies incredibly heavily on the Strait of Hormuz, largely due to exports pouring out of Qatar.
Which means when Hormuz is compromised, the LNG market tightens almost instantaneously. You see immediate price spikes.
Because you can't just store it and wait.
Exactly. Cargoes are frantically diverted and intense bidding wars break out between regions desperately trying to secure the few shipments already in transit.
And for Connector Inc.'s clients who operate or invest heavily in Asian markets, this is a glaring vulnerability. I mean, many Asian economies depend almost entirely on imports for their baseline energy needs.
They are very exposed.
So for those clients, LNG isn't just another commodity to trade, it is a real-time risk gauge. Because LNG has the least amount of physical buffer built into its supply chain, it reveals the true, unmasked health of the global system.
Which brings us to the most critical question. When the diplomatic dust finally settles, when the chaotic logistical unwind finishes its blast and the insurance markets eventually calm down, what remains?
Right.
Do we just revert to the exact same system we had before the disruption?
Let's bring the conversation back to Rick Westerdale's advisory suite. The crisis has technically ended. The hidden clock has run its course. But Rick isn't closing the file and going home.
No, he's not.
He is actively drafting an entirely new strategy for his clients because the fundamental nature of the global market has permanently shifted.
What's fascinating here is Rick's concluding insight in the memo. It's really profound. He states that the global energy system has run for decades on a core assumption, The idea that supply will always find its way to demand seamlessly, efficiently, and reliably.
And he says that's over.
He declares that this assumption is completely dead. He calls it the death of frictionless movement.
The death of frictionless movement. That means the era of assuming the logistics will simply sort themselves out of the background is over.
And this forces a permanent structural shift in how energy is valued. Energy is no longer priced simply by calculating the cost to extract it from the ground. It is now priced on the cost of secure delivery.
So if you are an executive or an investor navigating this landscape, here is the actionable playbook directly from the source. This is the strategy you would pay Connector Inc. to map out for you.
Yep.
Step 1. You have to shift your corporate priority from seeking a marginal cost advantage to prioritizing security of supply.
To put that simply, optimizing for the absolute cheapest barrel is no longer a viable strategy. It does not matter if you can secure a barrel of oil 50 cents cheaper if that specific barrel has to travel through a high-risk geographic choke point that might be closed tomorrow.
Exactly. Step 2. You have to pivot toward long-term contracts and step away from what the industry calls spot market exposure.
Right. The spot market is where companies buy energy on the open market right when they need it at whatever today's price happens to be.
Which used to be great.
For years, demand is officially dead.
Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion we have to draw from Westerdale's analysis.
Yeah, let's tie this all together.
The pricing of global energy, it is complex
Yeah.
and at times nuanced.
Right.
Much like the example of the light switch you used at the onset of this deep dive, energy pricing is not dependent on a single factor. Many factors impact the integrated supply chain of global energy.
It is not just efficiency or risk alone that drives the price of energy, right? The market has always considered both, among other factors.
Yes.
The rewiring of the global energy sector, based on the recent events associated with the Iranian conflict and the Strait of Hormuz, has increased the market's valuation and importance of security of supply and the risks associated with transportation through choke points.
Efficiency and the cost of production will remain a fundamental component of price, while the associated risks of transportation will comprise a greater share of the cost of energy and therefore influence the rewiring of the sector.
Yeah, and the example I would cite here is Japan and the country's dependence on imported energy.
That's a perfect example. I mean, Japan will not allow the lights to go out in Tokyo by being dependent on a single supply source, having all their eggs in one basket.
Right.
Their strategy has been to achieve security of supply through diversity of supply. However, given the Iranian conflict and the impact on the Strait of Hormuz, they must now also place a higher premium on transportation risks.
The loss of frictionless transport.
Exactly, as part of the cost of energy in doing business. This transcends the global energy sector and is causing a rewiring of the fully integrated supply chain.
It forces a total reevaluation of how goods move across the entire planet. But, it makes you wonder, though, if economic powerhouses like Japan are rewiring their entire economies and paying massive premiums to guarantee secure delivery, what happens to the developing nations that simply cannot afford to pay that premium?
That's a very tough question.
Right. Are we looking at a rapidly approaching future where energy security becomes the ultimate dividing line between the global rich and the global poor? That is a consequence of the loss of frictionless transport that could genuinely reshape the global order for decades.
It is a sobering thought for sure, and one that every policymaker and business leader will have to grapple with as this rewiring continues.
So the next time you walk into a room and flip that light switch, take a single second to appreciate the absolute miracle of logistics, timing, and risk management that allows that bulb to brighten. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this complex journey today. Your curiosity is what makes these deep dives so rewarding to produce. Keep asking the tough questions about how our world works. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.